And welcome to another episode of Experts Speak. I'm Michael DeLon, and today I am talking with Danya Shakfeh. And well, first of all, Danya, thank you
Yes.
for spending some time with me today.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. It's always good to talk with people who are experts at what they do, and Danya definitely is this expert. She's out of the Chicago area. She's an attorney, and I thought it was really fun. She says she's an entrepreneurial. She's an entrepreneur who's an attorney for entrepreneurs, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought I really like that. So
Too.
we're going to dive in and talk about how, as business owners, we really need to be legally protected in order to have greater profits, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, Danya, let's talk about that. But as we get there, tell me, how in the world did you get doing what you're doing today?
Well, it would start off as similar to the story of a lot of lawyers. We want to change the world, and some dream of having an impact. So growing up, especially as a minority, I was always concerned about civil rights, and I thought I would do like international law or civil rights or something like that. But I found that that was Um, it's great goals to have, but I realized that it's a lot harder to affect change in the world than, the typical 16-year-old thinks. And so I landed in corporate law, which is like some people might think the opposite of civil rights. But I intended to kind of, yeah, I had this like I'm gonna change the world mentality, but then but I needed a job.
Yeah.
So like that's great too. So I ended up getting a job right out of law school with a lawyer who did a lot of like business related stuff. And something that I also saw was that a lot of people end up in court because they're fighting over contracts and terms or things that they should have done and then they didn't do. And so I actually really started to love that area of law. I mean, because you see families falling apart or like, these like best friends who are no longer like they're not speaking terms because of business. And so it's kind of become my
Mhm.
mission to help business owners avoid that by doing things right, by having a strong foundation. So
Yeah.
that's how I landed show. And so that's how I have my, business law firm.
That's great. That's great. And so, you just talked about two or three things that are really, really important because I'm kind of old school, right? I came from the world that my word is my bond, and that
Yeah.
should be enough. And for the first few years, that's kind of how I ran my company. And
Mm,
then we ran into a couple of snafus, shall I say? They
yeah,
weren't massive, but they were almost a he said, she said,
exactly.
and that really got us thinking to go, you know what, we really need an agreement, a
Mm,
contract, whatever you call that thing. You really need
right.
to kind of just spell out, what am I going to do and what are you going to do? Do you find a lot of business owners just don't even have them, and they're trying to make something happen in business and they forget about it, or they don't see the value of it? What is going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, of course, I do see that a lot. I think, like you brought up a good point about he said, she said, because even when people, on a good day, when they want to be honest and they're not looking to hurt anyone, it does come to, well, what did we say? Like, what was the word that I'm supposed to be bound to begin with? Is it what
Yeah.
you said? Is it I said? Or is it neither or both? So I always tell my clients, I mean, yes, like the law wants to protect you, but there's also a real practical components of having a contract.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and so I apologize, I lost my train of thought
No,
because I
that's
got
okay.
a call and
No,
I just deleted it. Okay, so we can edit this
no,
part
that's
out.
good. Yeah, no, but
Yeah,
we're just talking about the
yeah,
importance of having it. And
right,
I like to call them, I mean, and I use this in all of my conversations, not just business, but
right,
let's have an kind of an upfront agreement. Let's get all of the hard conversations out front, make sure we're on the same page, and then
right,
let's go conquer the world, right? And that's
yeah.
kind of what you help business owners do, right?
Right. And then like another mistake I see too is that some people are just so excited to do business. They see this opportunity in front of them, and they really want to make money or, like realize their dreams. And then they want to do the contract.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes I'll have people come to my office and they're like, we want to write a contract. We already paid so and so this much money. We already got started. And I'm like, oh gosh, 'cause I'm like, you completely lost your negotiating power, or like you
Yeah.
did something that maybe you didn't have to do, or vice versa. You know, or like I try my best, but it's like, so like that's also another common issue that I see people run into is
Yeah.
just being too excited about the business and forgetting to
Well,
have a conversation about what everyone agreed to. Yeah.
it is, and unfortunately, what you do is very, very important. But when you're a young entrepreneur or an idea person, and you go to the marketing class or the marketing
Yeah.
boot camp and learn how to do marketing, they never mention anything that you do, right? And they don't
Right.
understand that we can get into something. And I mean, when I started my company, I just created a name. It wasn't Paperback Expert at the beginning. And we were
Mhm.
going about 6 months in, and I got a letter from an attorney saying, you need to stop using that name because my client owns it. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what do you mean? I had
You
no
didn't even
idea,
know that you didn't know, right?
right? And that can happen in so many things when you have, in my head, for what we do with helping experts create books, right? We have an agreement. We have terms and policies and procedures and timelines and all kinds of things that early on I just didn't have.
Yeah,
And I said,
yeah.
"Hey," but talk about the importance of that is in terms of keeping relationships clean and
Right.
understanding how why is that so valuable to employ somebody like you?
Well, I mean, so we can even start with, like a book or excuse me, like or like the service that you provide. I'll bet, as so intellectual property is one of the most highly litigated, areas. And so, at the very beginning, if someone wanted to help or like write a book, you want to know who owns the rights to that book. Like if someone else wrote the book for me, do they have some sort
Right.
of rights? Is it all mine? Is it shared? Is it combined? What happens if they're like, like if I brought in an idea and then you just, or
Yeah.
like built upon it, so it's like those are the kinds of discussions it's really important to have because people are going to invest so much money and time. I mean, money can be made, but time, like once you lose time, like you can't, I'm like
Take
get
that
that
back.
back. So having those discussions up front, and it really becomes of like not knowing what you didn't know. And
Yes.
so that's why it's important to at least have a discussion with a lawyer and learn what you don't know.
Right. Well, because I'm pretty confident, Anya, that you could ask me about 10 questions that I've never even thought of when it
Yeah.
comes to business and things, because it's what you do, it's how you're trained, and it's probably just how you think, right? I'm married to a woman who thinks totally differently than me, and she'll say something. I'm like, I would never even think about that. And that's the value that you bring to the table for entrepreneurs who are typically big idea people. And oh my, the last thing I want to do is get down into the nitty gritty of an agreement. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it really is you form a partnership per se. I don't know if that's the right word,
Mhm.
but you come alongside. Talk about how that works when a business owner comes to you and says, okay, here's what I'm thinking, or here's what I've done. What's the process even look like?
So I start those with something called like a strategy session because I think a lot of people like they dig in right into like the legal aspects, but I consider a contract really part of a business model too. So I'll really sit down for an hour, hour and a half with my client and learn about their sales cycle and their marketing cycle,
Mhm.
who their ideal clients are, how they charge, what they charge for, what like mistakes have they made in the past that they don't want to repeat again. So I talk, I mean, I go in, I mean, so like talking about the legal stuff is it's important, but I can best do that when I understand my
Yeah.
client and where they're coming from a business perspective. And I find I learned a lot about what they did and did not know, and I give them a lot more guidance than just, oh, here's an indemnity or
Right.
intellectual property clause, something really boring like that.
Yeah. Well, and that's really good, and I'm glad you do it that way because you're right. I mean, I've read some contracts, and
Right.
yeah, praise God they got people like you who understand and like it.
Yeah.
Because it's just like my deer in the headlights. I'm going, I don't even know what that says, and I would much rather work with somebody who understands my business
Yeah.
enough to go, okay, I get what you're trying to do. Here's what we're going to do, and now I'm going to explain it in fifth grade terms.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll bet a lot of lawyers can't even read some of those contracts, unfortunately, because they're like outdated word verbiage, or people just like copy, like even attorneys, like they'll copy and paste stuff because they don't, and
Yeah,
so I think they're just scared of leaving something else, like rather include it. But
yeah,
I think it just becomes like people don't know what they're writing or signing anymore. So yeah, that's
yeah.
just another
And
topic going on about that.
well, and it's crazy. So talk about I mean, who's an ideal client? What's going on in the mind of the entrepreneur that
Mhm.
you would serve really well? What's going on in their head that they may or may not even be thinking about in terms of running their business and things? What would cause them to go, yeah, maybe I should reach out?
So, even though this isn't technically legal, profitability is surprisingly not something that a lot of business owners start to think about. And so it's like, I'm just going to charge this much money. And I'm like, well, how did you even arrive at that? Well, all my other competitors are charging that. And I'm like, so I'm like, well, let's sit down and talk about your business model. And that comes up a lot too when I write their contracts for their clients, like how they scope their services. I'm like, well, like when you scope your services, are you sure you're not undercharging? Or if I'm also doing their employment agreement and I know how much they're paying their employees and how much they're charging their clients, and there's like a small gap there. I was like, you gotta widen that gap if you want to profit. So that's
Yeah,
probably the first thing is like talk to a lawyer who really understands business,
yeah,
because you're gonna gain that valuable insight. Another thing too is how to manage the people, like the relationship with other people, and that's through your contracts, through the way that you style your business. So those are some of the things I talk about for clients who are just getting started. Of course, the conversation is a little bit more different than someone who's more, experienced in business. But even then, they'll all need those reminders.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And when you're talking with business owners, because I mean, when somebody thinks about attorney and contracts or agreements or whatever,
Yeah.
I immediately think um, owner to client or prospect.
Hmm.
What about like vendor relationships or strategic partnerships? Should there be agreements like that between a company that I'd be partnering with or something like that? How do you help structure that? Is that something?
So like vendors, third parties, yeah, that's really important to have that clear because obviously, like if you're a business owner and you're selling widgets to clients, but your vendor gets backed up or they fail to like deliver, who's going to be responsible when you as the business is going to suffer as a result if the quality is not good or if it causes harm to one of your clients? Like, how are you going to protect yourself in that scenario? And so that would be addressed in the contracts. You also want to be clear. I mean, it's really what we talked about earlier. Like, you don't want a he said, she said scenario. Like,
Right.
I want to sell my widgets and I want to have X amount of widgets so that I can make a profit, but it wasn't clear when I'm going to receive those widgets, like from my vendor or how much they're charging me and what they're charging me and who is responsible when it's shipped. Like, if the widgets get or like damaged at, like during
Yeah.
transportation for all of these things would go in there. I mean, there's a lot that goes on that people don't realize. So absolutely.
Wow, that's a and the other idea that I had, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier with who owns what IP or whatever. But in our,
Mm.
do we still call it the gig economy? Right, with so
Yes.
many contractors out there, what should you? Is there a way to have kind of a blanket contract for 1099 contractors? Really, is what they are, regardless of what they're doing for your business. If you're going to, how does even that work? Because this is a whole new
Uh,
world.
Yeah, so I would start by saying is that a lot of employers misclassify their employees. They want to be contractor. They want their workers to be contractors. They don't have responsibility and liability of employees. And people make this mistake like it's their choice, but the law actually decides who is an independent contractor and who is an employee. So that's like the first thing. I'm like making sure that the employer understands that they can't just choose how their workers are classified. Another thing too is the law, like the way that the law is evolving is that because of the gig economy, like states like Illinois, like where I'm based in, contractors are actually like getting a lot more rights, almost similar, if not the same as or like if they were employees. So for
Right.
example, in Illinois, they came out with a law a few years ago that you can't discriminate against independent contractors just because now people are using them so much and there was a lot of abuse. And so in the past, you could choose not to hire an independent contractor if, for example, if they were female.
Hmm.
But now you can't do that anymore. And there are some other rights as well that are coming. So just to be careful is like trying to avoid those responsibilities of an independent contractor. The law is shifting.
Yeah.
Eventually, it will catch up to technology and the times, but that's something to be mindful of too.
Yeah. So I think the big takeaway so far is don't be afraid of the law. Don't be afraid of
Hmm.
agreements. In fact, they are. I look at agreements and contracts and all of that very much like budgeting and a budget. That
Right.
my wife put me on a budget years ago, and I was like, I don't want a budget,
Smart move.
and well, it was,
Yeah.
it really was. Because what I learned is a budget is not constricting; it's actually
Mhm.
very freeing. Because now
Right.
I get my allowance every month, and I can go spend it any way I want.
Yeah. It's a good look at it.
Very, very much like a well-structured legal agreement. There
Hmm.
are or you're in Chicago. I think you have a couple bridges there, right? You go over
Yeah.
a bridge and you have the guardrails on the edge. Well, those
Hmm.
are for your safety and protection. Inside of those guardrails, you've got a lot of freedom. And
Yeah.
as somebody comes to you, a business owner, it's would it be safe to say that your agreements that you put together are not like off the shelf? Here's 1.2.4, that you're actually working with that business owner and crafting an agreement
Hmm.
specifically for them. Obviously, some of the language is going to be the same, but it's for them and their business so that they can become more profitable and really many times avoid lawsuits or arbitration or whatever would happen. Is
Hmm.
that a fair
Oh,
summary?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing too is now that because it's so easy to become a business owner or to execute ideas in this day and age, there's so many unique businesses with very unique offerings. You can't just get a template for like certain types of businesses anymore because everyone is so unique. And so, am I starting off with templates? Yeah, probably, but they're so customized and so tailored to my clients' professional and
Right.
personal goals.
Yeah.
So, because everyone's
But
different. So.
and let's just shoot the elephant that's in the room, okay?
Yeah.
Is online legal forms. Can't I just go to like Google and download an online form about an agreement and just use it?
You can. You can. Similar to you can, but I don't recommend that. And I've
Yeah.
seen people come to me with those and you have to redo them and they're
Oh,
not always up to date. They're just all it's it's like, yeah, no, I mean you can
yeah.
just you should.
It's not, yeah. And I
Yeah.
ask that almost tongue in cheek because I've seen people do it. I've also seen people create their wills and estates that way. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, that's a little bit too important to do. You really need, because what you find is that
Hmm.
the dollars you invest to hire a great, competent attorney to protect you are going to come back to you over and over again. I cannot tell you how much time, effort, energy it saved us in a couple of situations where we said, no, 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 go look at the agreement in paragraph 4, page 2,
Right.
subpoint A. That's what it said. That's what you agreed to, and that's the deal.
Yeah.
And
It's
it
kind of like, oh,
it ended the conversation.
yeah.
Everybody was happy, but it was like, that's it, because there was
It
no,
was.
it saved us so much time and effort and money. And like you said, you can't get back your time.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like what I say, or I heard this somewhere. It's actually I heard it on a gardening show, but I think it applies to life. Like a cheap tool is an expensive tool. You try to cheap out on something, but you will find like like you end up going to pay for it a different way, and it's going to be more expensive.
That is so funny. I love
Yeah.
that image because I bought a cheap shovel one time with a long handle, right? And the handle broke because it was cheap, so I had to go
Yeah.
buy another one, which I didn't buy the same. That's a
Yeah.
great phrase. A cheap tool is an expensive tool.
And then you ended up probably, so you bought the cheap tool and then you had to go buy the more expensive one, which is even more money.
Right.
And then you had to waste your time trying to fix the problem that the shovel did, or the cheap one. And then hopefully, and then it's very possible that maybe you hit yourself in the face. Then you have to go to the
That's right.
hospital and take care of that. And then it just becomes this huge mountain. And then you're just like, I should have just bought
You
the
should have
nicer
just
shovel to begin with.
absolutely. And
We've
if
all
you're
been there. I mean, speaking from
we
experience.
we've all been there, right? And
Yeah.
if you're running a business and you don't have a number of agreements in place, then you need to reach out to Danya, because the time is what is really going to save you. Because when you start having a dispute over a part of your agreement or whatever, it takes time to think about it, to pull together other people, to email back and forth, to call, and you're going to end up either really breaking a relationship, maybe getting sued, or hiring an attorney who's going to come back and try to backfill what you didn't do the first time. And that is a little expensive too, because there's just not an easy fix. So it's much better to start from the beginning or wherever you are and reach out to Danya and say, okay, here's where I am. Maybe I did something wrong, but help. What can we do? And start that dialogue. Is that a safe next step for somebody?
Like if someone already tried to do it on their own and then they want to fix it before they end up in court.
Either that, or they're a business owner who really hasn't thought too much about this,
Right.
and they're like, wow, yeah, maybe I should have that conversation. I've never
Mhm.
really thought about the importance of having
Right.
a real ironclad agreement of some, because it's so, I mean, we hear ironclad agreement. It's like there's probably nothing like that. And it's less of an agreement's less of handcuffs. And that's what it
Mhm.
feels like. That word is just handcuff-ish versus,
Yeah.
no, this is how I'm communicating. It's on paper so everybody can see what we're saying and what we mean. Is that because,
Yeah. But I start that conversation with my clients. What do you want? Like, what do you
mm,
want from this business? Do you want freedom of your time? Do you want to grow your business? Do you want to keep it small? Like, let's start with what you want. And it's so interesting because even such a simple question, a lot of people don't know how to answer that.
that's right.
And so it's like, and then we start with what they want, and then I work from there to create the best contracts and the best relationship. I mean, you could really replace the word agreement or contract with relationship, and it's pretty much the same because that's ultimately what it's just in writing, so that there's no confusion. And so, but I start with what the client wants and what their goals are, and then go from there.
That's good. That's and it would be worth hiring Danya just for that. Because until
Thanks.
you're really clear on what you're trying to do in business, you're kind of going in circles. But you get that clarity, and you let her craft this agreement so that as you build relationships with clients and vendors and things, everybody knows exactly what's going on. And Danya, I bet this is true in a lot of people you help. We have an agreement, for our clients and things. I think I've been doing this since 2013. I think I've probably only had 5 or 6 people, well, probably A, ever read it, but B, actually say, well, I've got a question about this one statement, and we clarify it. And we've had to write addendums once in a while to,
Right.
for certain reasons. So it's still a flexible living document, but it's
Mhm.
very consistent, and it just helps us to stay focused and to make sure that we're saying what we mean and that
Yeah.
we're actually meaning what we say.
Mhm. I think that's true. Like, it's similar to what you talked about earlier, was that once you kind of get that stuff out of the way, then you can focus on the relationship versus,
100%.
trying to build the ship as you go along.
Yeah.
And I like having that. Like, okay, now that we, it's like housekeeping. Let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Let's get the contract out of the way, and then we can focus on building our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where the joy in business comes from, is the relationship aspect, and coming alongside your new client saying, how do I help you get that? How do I help
Yeah.
you grow or do whatever I'm supposed to do, solve that widget? Because that's the relational aspect of it. And that's where our businesses grow, as they refer us to other people and things. But it really is, if you want a long-term profitable business, and I haven't looked, but I bet Google and Apple and Microsoft, I bet they have agreements. I bet they do.
Maybe.
So
Maybe.
maybe small business owners should have them
Yeah.
too. So if you don't have one, or even if you have questions about one, I bet Danya would be willing to have a
Mhm.
have a conversation with you to help you understand the right way to protect your business. Danya, if this has been really fascinating. We could go on and on because I've got lots of questions
Yeah,
back.
we could.
Um,
Yeah.
where does somebody go to reach out to you to say, yeah, I've got a question or I might need some help? How do they get a hold of you? What would they do?
Sure. So they can call our office at 630-517-5529, or shoot an email to me at Danya, Danya at motivalaw.com. That's Motiv as in Victor, A law.com. And that's our website too, motivalaw.com.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to grab that. I'm going to put that in the show notes, so that as a busy business owner, they're probably out conducting business or walking the
Yeah.
dog or exercise. I don't know what they're doing. But if you need that information, it's going to be in the show notes. So come back and reach out to Danya and have that conversation, because I cannot stress enough personally how valuable an agreement is to our company. I know it is to yours. And if you're like me, you were flying by a wing and a prayer there for a few years. So you need to reach out to Danya and find somebody who understands the entrepreneurial mindset, because she is an entrepreneur and she understands legal agreements and all of that. She can really, really help you out. So reach out to her, motivalaw.com. I'll capture her email and things in the show notes. And Danya, thank you. This has been really intriguing, insightful. Thank you for doing what you do with the passion that you have for it. I really appreciate you sharing your
Oh,
expertise on Expert Speak.
sure, it was my pleasure. I appreciate you having me.